So let's take a look at where we left off last time. We made three classes, a countdown timer. This is where we're going to code the actual timer moving, a game manager, and a UI manager. We're going to have a lot more scripts in this. We'll have an audio manager and all that. We're going to try to build this, architect this game so that as you build these out, they increase in complexity and it'll help you with understanding and that you could actually use these as a solid understanding to get a job as a tech artist or programmer, entry-level engineer. So I guess we could start by tackling this countdown timer here. Now, we're going to have to jump really between these scripts as we build out logic. So actually, you know what? Let's start with the game manager. I think that might be the easiest because we've built one out before. I'm going to actually close out some of these other scripts here from the Pong game. So let's just close these out so we could just focus on this game manager. All right, so the first thing I want to do is I want to create an enumerator, and this is going to represent the different game states. And it's not a hard thing to understand, but if it's new right off the bat for a lot of people, a lot of students of mine, they get scared. So I'm going to type this out, and then we'll look at it, what exactly enumerator is and how it's used to handle different game states. Okay, so here's our enumerator. These are gray because we haven't used them yet. So this looks, again, it's probably going to look a little bit foreign, but all this is a way for us to sort of tell the code or tell our game what our current state is. So for example, you can make any one of these, you can name them pretty much anything you want. But for me, I know there's going to be an intro state. This is going to be some sort of cinematic that happens during my Space Invaders game where it's like maybe the main character like slides in or something. I don't know. We'll figure it out. And then we have a countdown timer, which in a lot of games is generally used when the game starts to load in all the assets. And then when we're playing, if the player wants to pause the game over, whatever. This is really just text. I don't want you to think about it as anything really that's that insane. But it's really just text that is used to kind of indicate to code what the current state is. All right, so let's create a couple references, variables to store our UI manager and our countdown timer that we created in the last tutorial. Okay, if you remember before, that serialized field really indicates it's a way of us exposing this variable, which is called UI manager here, and also exposing this countdown private variable inside the editor. If we were to remove serialized field, we wouldn't be able to add these in our editor. So let's go back to our editor and hook those up. All right, so remember we created this game manager here. It looks like it's spending some time reloading. Looks like we got a little crash. So let me I left it to record just to show you that like it does happen to me too. So I'm going to try to figure out what's going on. All right, I'm back in. I'm not exactly sure. I looked at the logs and stuff. It didn't look like there's any errors in memory. But anyway, if it crashes again, hopefully it doesn't. But it does look like I lost my. I didn't get a chance to save the those two elements. So I'm just going to pause the video and recreate them. And the two elements being the UI manager and the countdown manager. Actually, I'll just recreate them so you don't have to go back and watch it if you forgot. So I'm going to call this UI manager here. And then we're going to create another UI, and it's just a text mesh pro object here. And that's where our timer is going to go. So just grabbing this, dropping it in here. So the reason I'm trying to drag these in and they're not working is because I forgot that I have to hook up these scripts because it's looking for anything that has that script on there. And one other thing I think I messed up in the code is it's called SI Game Manager. Probably one of the problems of using Space Invaders or SI is the opening thing. So let me just go back into the script really quick. And we already have one other UI manager, which we could have reused, and here's our SI UI manager. There we go. And then I'm going to delete the rest of this. Now we're using the right Space Invaders one. And ideally, you would use the same code, but I'm trying to get you guys to think about programming and all this other stuff. And sometimes if the game is, if there are some subtle differences between them, you can expand them. But anyway, here's our UI manager. It has SI UI manager. Here's our countdown. And this guy should have the countdown timer on him script, which is this. And now when we go into our game manager, I'll be able to grab this, drop it in here, and grab this and drop it in here. All right, let's return to our script and then work on some more game manager's code. Okay, so the next thing I'd like to do is reference the current game state. So I made a variable here. It's just private. It only works in this class, essentially, unless we serialize it or we do some funny, some extra code. But right now, I only really want it to work in this class, and it's called current state. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be using this to set the current state to intro and be able to switch between states depending on where we are in our game. And we'll be calling this from other scripts, but we'll be passing it into maybe another method that controls that. All right, so let's, as you recall, start runs right when the game starts. So I want to set up some listeners for the countdown timer event. And what this is essentially, we're going to keep working with event-driven systems for a while until we do our multiplayer tutorial. But for now, we're setting up listeners for countdown events. And listeners will broadcast something to the entire game or to anything that has a listener on it, and from the other scripts. So right now, we're just listening for our countdown timer to send a message saying that our UI has been updated. So let me type that out. So for that, we're going to have to jump over to our countdown script, and we're going to have to write some events, create some Unity events that listen for seconds and stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and just open up our SI countdown timer script. And in here, let's just create essentially a variable at the top here. And we're just going to create a timer variable to keep track of the remaining time. So we're not going to be really setting this outside of here. I mean, we can later if you think you'd like to set your own countdown timer. And then what we need to do next is we need to create a series of events to notify listeners of countdown events or countdown updates. All right, so we have an event here that we created, and we're going to make a couple events just to listen, and we're in the SI countdown timer. Now, I know, again, this might be, if you just started learning to code or whatever, this can kind of get overwhelming. It takes practice or whatever, but it's really not that hard to understand. You're learning a language here. So public means we can access this outside of the script. And you want to up top add Unity engine.events so that we're working with these Unity events here. Now, this particular variable here, which is on countdown tick, right? And I capitalized it because generally, I like to do public variables. Not always. I'll sort of, when I'm in my own projects, I need to do a better way of holding standards. But for Unity events, I generally make, and especially if they're public, I generally give them a capital letter here. And it's a Unity event, and it can hold integers, which are just any whole number. And we're allocating new memory for this. That's all you have to do to think about this. Now let's just create a field, or I'm sorry, a variable just to check if our countdown has finished, because we need to find a way that once our countdown is finished that we can jump into actually playing the game. So I'm going to add another event right now. All right, so here's another variable. It's a Unity event just called on countdown finished, and we're just saying that it's a new Unity event. And I added this comment up top just saying that it's triggered when the countdown finishes. All right, so next we need to add a flag to check if our countdown is currently active. In programming, you want to make sure that you have checks and balances sort of in place. And we're going to check if our countdown is finished, we want to set it to false. And we always want to have that as sort of a stopgap to always see, and this is just really a Boolean variable. Let me go ahead and type that out. So if we set this to true, our countdown variable is currently counting. So this could be from 3 seconds to 100 seconds. And if it's done, we have this set to false, and we can use this later to check. Now, we need to actually create another variable up top, and this is going to store how many seconds we have remaining in our variable. All right, so we're adding this field here, and what this is saying is the duration of this countdown is really, we're going to set the countdown duration to 3 seconds. And we made it serialized field so we can set it to 10 seconds, 3, or whatever. Later, we can go in when we're making our network game, and we can just update this by how much time the stuff needs to load. All right, so let's power through the rest of this code. I'm going to go ahead and change this to start countdown. And what this method is going to do is essentially just set the countdown timer, which is this right here. Remember, this is a variable to keep track of the remaining time, to 3. So a quick way to do that is just grab this and make it equal to count time timer duration. So we're right off the bat, we're starting our counter. We're setting it to 3 seconds. And then where we set this to false here, we're just going to make this equal to true. So we turn on our timer. So this is setting it to 3 seconds, setting our timer to true. I'm not a big fan of always using update for stuff, but for this particular project, I think it's okay. Because what we're going to do here is we're going to check if we are timing. So I'm going to type if and then hit tab twice, copy this. And this is the same way of saying if our counter is currently set to true, we're going to subtract some time, right? So what we can do is we can subtract, remember this is set to 3. We can make this minus equals time dot delta time. So what this is doing is it's the same way of saying, it's the same way of writing like countdown timer equals the count time timer minus time dot delta time. And so we're really taking the time, like it's the time, I believe this is like military time or something, the time that's currently passing, subtracting it from 3, which is what it's currently set to, out every frame, which is our update frame. And then what we want to do is, because a float value is fractional, we're going to go ahead and round our timer here to the nearest integer. So let me go ahead and pause the video and type that code out. So we made a variable called rounded time, and we made it equal to, so mathf is a library of different math functions. Ceiling to integer is going to take this value. So let's say this value is like 9.3, and it's going to round it up to the ceiling. So this would be equal to 10. So if we get in a fractional value of whatever, it's just going to keep rounding it up. And that's what this line of code does. All right, so the next thing we're going to do in here is we want to invoke the countdown tick event with the rounded remaining time. So what exactly am I talking about here? We made this Unity event, which consists of 2 things. Forgive me, I know we went through this with Pong, but it's always great to get a refresher because it's kind of a complex concept, is events and listeners. We have an event here called onCountdownFinish, and we have one called onCountdownTick, which takes in an integer. The second we invoke this, which is we're going to invoke it by sending out an integer, it lets everything else that's listening for this know that we invoked it. And what we're invoking here is the time, the current seconds, which is rounded time. Because all rounded time is doing is it's subtracting, right? We're taking in this counter here, which every frame is subtracting 3 down to 0. And it'll even go to negative if we don't put a stopgap on it. And then we're rounding it up to the ceiling to the greatest integer, and we're storing it here. So let me go ahead and type that out. Okay, so that's the line that's going to broadcast out the rounded time to anything that's listening for time, which we're going to pull from our UI manager and other classes. Let's add another if statement here, because remember we had this other event here, which is just checking if our countdown finished. That means that our countdown here is less than or equal to 0. So I'm just going to paste this in here for a second and just comment this out. I hit Control K and C to auto comment. And what we're checking here is if our countdown timer is less than or equal to 0 here. And what that does is So this is subtracting it. This is bringing it down. Our countdown timer is being rounded up to the latest here in whole number. When it hits 0, we want to do something. And remember, we have this stopgap here, which is this is counting equals true. Well, once we hit 0, we want to stop counting. So I'm going to say is counting equals false. And then we want to let everyone know. So on counting is finished. We want to broadcast using invoke to everyone that's listening to when this is finished. And that's going to be in our game manager and other scripts that it has finished counting. And for now, until we add things later, this looks like a pretty finished countdown timer. So in the next video, we'll jump back into maybe our game manager or UI manager. And actually, let me double check one last thing while we're together. I want to double check that our game manager has, our UI manager and our countdown script. So let's go ahead and save this. And then in the next video, we'll jump in and work on the other managers.